I think when I first started out in my career, it was very important for me to identify with my work, which is not uncommon, certainly, but God calls us to be not only providers, but protectors, priests, and presiders over our family.
Welcome to the Strategic Families Podcast, where we challenge families to be rooted in God's Word, energized with gospel-centered purpose, and activated on mission for His kingdom. Oh, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Strategic Families Podcast. This is Graham Clark here with episode 1.09. And today we're going to interview my buddy David Vroon, who is just an awesome man of God. He and his wife Becky are a powerhouse couple in our church, Stonebridge Church Community in Charlotte. David leads the men's ministry and does a fantastic job with that. And so he's got a lot of passion around helping men step up to be the men that God has called us to be. But this episode isn't just for men. This is a good one for wives also, to know how to call their men up into the responsibilities that God has given us. All right, let's roll it. Well, I am very excited to introduce to you my buddy David Vroon. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Graham. Appreciate the opportunity.
David, I'm so glad that you and I have got to know each other over the past year or 2 years at Stonebridge Church Community here in Charlotte. Just by way of introduction, why don't you tell us who you are, where you live, where you grew up, how many kids you have, all that good stuff.
Well, first of all, thanks, Graham. Thanks again for the invite. It's really great to see you taking on this role and responsibility of being a strategic father and promoting strategic families. So I really appreciate that. So my background is grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Born and raised there. Was one of 4 boys to a loving family, mom and dad intact. I took that for granted, but I don't take that lightly anymore in this day and age. So born and raised there. I was the second of 4 boys. We had a wonderful opportunity to grow up in a Christian family where my parents were raised us in the faith. My grandparents were believers, my great-grandparents. So we had generational Christianity, which was really, really terrific. I didn't really know that, and I didn't appreciate that when I was growing up, because when you were in Grand Rapids, it's kind of like, well, that's just what everybody does there. So you all grow up and you have a lot of family members around and you have generational Christianity. So I kind of took that for granted. But when we moved down here in Charlotte, North Carolina in 1995, we were actually involved with a life group. And one of the life group members actually said to us that they were first generation Christians. And when they went home for Christmas, they were berated by their family members for celebrating Christmas. And it hit me right between the eyes to say, wow, we really are blessed to have that generational Christianity upbringing, where it's a time that I didn't know who Jesus Christ was. So it was really, really terrific. Very blessed to have that. And I met my lovely wife, Becky, of 37 years, actually today. So we met at Calvin College, and we had very, very similar values and a very similar upbringing. So we really bonded well as husband and wife, and we've been blessed for 37 years. We have 4 children, 4 adult children, one son 34, one daughter 32, one daughter 30, and one daughter 26. They are all married. 3 of them have children. One got married last year, 26-year-old in the midst of COVID. 5 grandchildren with 1 more on the way. One is due in December. And they all live relatively close by. One is about an hour away. One is about 0.4 of a mile away. One's 20 minutes away, and one is down in Charleston.
That is excellent. I love how you have, it seems like, grown in the appreciation of how amazing it is to have generations of faithfulness. What a cool testimony of how the Lord uses parents and grandparents to pass the faith to their children. And of course, we are all about that here on the Strategic Families Podcast. And that leads really well into the next question that I wanted to ask you was just, you and Becky are empty nesters now, as you mentioned, and you've run the race of parenting faithfully. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on. Take us back, David, to 25, 30 years ago when you guys were just starting out with kids, young family. What was important to you and Becky about passing on your faith? How did you engage your kids? Things like teaching God's word to them, service projects. I know you had mentioned to me and my wife, Katie, you guys mentioned to us a few weeks ago about how you involved your kids in service at the church. And I loved that story. I love that rhythm. So I was wondering if you could just talk to us about that, what that looked like in your family.
Oh yeah, thanks. That's great. Well, that was really, really important to us. We both grew up in families that served and gave themselves away. We never knew a time where we just weren't plugged into something. We, after church on Sundays, my parents would invite people over. After church, we would get involved with service projects. My dad was a deacon, so I saw him as I was growing up, getting involved with mercy ministries, helping people in need, taking care of the finances of the church. My mom was a nurse, and just from that point, that's such a nurturing thing. Always serving other people, putting other people before her, and that was just kind of a mindset in our family growing up. And then that really was the same with Becky, with her parents. And when we got married, it was just we just unconsciously did it. It was just something that we did in our life. And when the kids came along, actually, I didn't think I was ready to be real quick here. I didn't think I was ready to be a dad. I took my role as a dad really seriously, and I still do. But I don't think I was ready to be a dad till I was to my fourth child. I just didn't feel I was ready to be a dad. I didn't feel like I had what it took to do that. And anyway, by God's grace, the kids turned out pretty well. But we instilled a lot of when the kids were younger. I mean, Becky did GEMS. It was like a little, and I did like cadets, and it was a kind of a Christian version of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts at our church. And I remember Becky would take the kids, and we just take them along. We'd just be part of it. Or we would have to go to church, and we'd have to set chairs up. And I'm a 6-7-year-old son. It's like, hey, we're gonna go set some chairs up at church. Let's go. And then that's all we really all he knew. And that was just look for opportunities where we could serve and be part of something bigger than ourselves, and look outwardly versus inwardly. And that really helped a lot with just in raising those kids up.
That's excellent. Well, I know you said that it happened unconsciously, but it also comes from a life of intention. You and Becky wanted to raise your kids to know and love the Lord, and service to the Lord is part of that. And I love that you guys just brought them along with you, and so they sort of learn by doing. I mean, in a way, I think you could consider that an element of discipleship, which is really cool. And if I had a chance to talk to your kids, I'm sure they would have great stories to share about that. So, well, this is a good tie, what you mentioned about being a father and not feeling ready to be a father. I think that's a really common thing for young men. And I wanted to tie that into your work with the men's ministry at Stonebridge. I know that's a passion of yours, and you do it so well. I'm so thankful to be involved with it. Could you just talk to us about why you got involved in men's ministry, why you think men's ministry is so important in the life of a church?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it is passionate for me. I'm hopefully purposeful with it. I've got a good group of guys right now, and I started that back in '95. Not started it as being a leader, but just being involved with it. And we had 40 or 50 guys back then, so we had a great group of guys. Didn't have a whole lot of intentionality maybe and purpose and direction. So over the course of time, God's coalesced that and brought it together. But I just believe that the men and being a man is a privilege and responsibility. And what better way to convey that and be purposeful with that than to get involved with a group of guys who are looking to head in the same direction, be godly men. First of all, be godly husbands, be godly fathers, be godly community leaders and churchgoers, and not just churchgoers, but being involved with church. So one of the things we talk about in our men's ministry is that the men are the rebar of the church, right? So we look at that foundationally. So we love to say that little phrase.
I like that.
Really important. So yeah, growing up, it was really important to me. I had a great example of as a father, and of course, our ultimate heavenly Father is the best example of all. So it's just really important to me to convey that and help other guys move along on that journey. The older I get, the more I see that a lot of guys perhaps didn't have a good a father. They maybe had a father who was there, but who was distant, or maybe who was demanding, kind of a authoritarian type father, maybe who was involved but didn't really have a vision for his family. And I'm just so, I'm such a believer of having being an involved dad and having a strategic direction and a purpose for your family. And I'd love to convey that and share that and challenge guys to move in that direction as well.
That's a fantastic point. I think we can all agree, we need men to step up and, take the rightful role that God has given us,
Yeah.
the servant leadership of our families, and, loving our wives as Christ loved the church, and just such a great responsibility and privilege. I love that you pointed that out. I wonder, David, if you could talk to us just in your experience in men's ministry, and obviously we're going to tie this into family, of the Strategic Families podcast, and you touched on it a little bit, but if we can just dive in there a little bit more. But the challenges that young men face, especially young men who are raising their families right now, we talked before we started the interview just about how difficult it can be to manage all of the challenges and the needs that a young man has. There's work, there's extracurricular stuff, kids sports, there's marriage, there's relationship with your kids, involvement in the church. I mean, it's a lot. And sometimes men might feel like, I don't even know where to start, and may just kind of get lost in the shuffle. And so what if you could just talk about some of those challenges that men face, and then what has been your approach to encourage guys who are in that stage of life?
That's a great question. I think when I first started out in my career, it was very important for me to identify with my work, which is not uncommon, certainly, but God calls us to be not only providers, but protectors, priests, and presiders over our family. And I think that I was pretty heavily skewed in the provision piece. And that's not uncommon for guys. Guys get a lot of their worth and value and identity. And they want to climb that corporate ladder. They want to be validated at work. And that can go to your head pretty quick, especially if you're good at something, right? You're good at it. I think it's really, from the question, but young families is just I'm going to use the word balance here, but I left it all in the field at work. I would come home and I was pretty emotionally and mentally drained. And some days I was just kind of there physically for the kids, but I surely wasn't there spiritually or mentally or emotionally there for them. So, that took its toll. Becky was very good. Thankfully, she was an at-home mom at that point in time, which really helped. But, she had some good words with me about making sure that I left something in the tank for the kids. So
right.
What I started to do was I had a baseball hat in my car, and I would take that baseball hat and I would put it on and drive home with it. And then when I got home, I would take that baseball hat off, and it would be like putting another baseball hat on. So, okay, my work hat is off. Now my so it's a really good reminder for me to just leave the work at work. And then, I think you got to do some visuals. Guys are very visually oriented. So something like that to help them understand that, hey, there's a time for work, but there's also a time to invest into your children. And I'm just so glad that I was able to invest in my children, and that it wasn't a detriment to my career. May have been, but I didn't see it that way, because the kids and their futures and their spiritual growth and advancement is going to be much more important than any sort of career move that I could make. So
that's just a great idea. I mean, the tangible reminder of, I've got this hat on, now I'm changing hats. And, that is what we have to do as young men, go through life, putting on different hats, and it can be challenging to know sometimes to know which hat you've got on. But I love that example that you provided, investing in your kids. Like, that's just not something that you'll ever regret as a dad. And when you step into that and realize that it is, it's our call as men, as fathers and husbands, to invest in our wives, to invest in our kids. What was it for you, do you think? I mean, maybe it wasn't a moment, maybe it was over time, but where do you think it started to click for you that, like, okay, this is my calling? And not just this is my calling, but like, this is what I want to do. This is fulfilling as a dad.
First of all, I love family. I love the family unit. I love the way God designed family, how he ordained family to be, procreate and flourish. So that was really ingrained in me and in my family and upbringing. So that's always been very important to me. So, and I guess I had a mindset too of saying, I don't want to let the family down by putting too much of my time and effort into my career, because my friend Russell called, you be a hero to strangers, right? And then your kids end up not knowing you. And, after a while, you get involved with travel, you get involved with different things at work and things like that. And after a while, your family starts to function without you, right? And that's very unhealthy. And after a while, you're kind of inserting yourself in the family versus leading your family. So that make sure you safeguard yourself against that, guys. So,
Yeah.
but I think that's when you talk about presiding over your family, God calls us to be the authority in our family, to live under his authority, first of all, but also to be the authority in the family. And that's not to, rule an iron fist, certainly, but, to be authoritative, like, hey, dad's in charge, dad loves mom well, and mom and dad love the kids well. So I think that's very, very important. So, and that was just part of our makeup when we grew up, and we loved the kids, and we loved being together with them, and we wanted to make sure there was some good quality time together.
A couple of things you said just reminded me of stories I've heard or things I've heard in the past. I remember one guy was given a devotion one time, and I think he was like a pastor to senators, and he said, there's all these guys that are like hugely important to their colleagues, and they're just a joke at home. And I remember that just struck me, that thought of like, man, I never want to be that guy who's really important in my career, but not important at all at home, just kind of like a footnote, at home. And how sad would that be? And I love what you said about, just male headship. And of course, like not an iron fist. I mean, in fact, Ephesians 5, like we're called to lay down our lives for our wives. Right. That's the kind of leadership that the Bible endorses. And what a great call to men to step into that role in loving, service to our wives and our families. And that only happens when we dive in and we're there and we're actively involved. And so I love that you are encouraging guys to do that, and that you did that in your own family.
Yeah, I think it's important too, just to find ways to serve your wife in front of your kids, and not to do it in a braggadocious way or whatever, but just to show and model that behavior. We talk about, more is caught than taught. We always talk about that. It's, hey, honey, I complimented Becky all the time on, hey, great meal. How can I empty the dishwasher? How can I clean the table? How can I clean up after? Just things that just acts of service, and just to say, your wife's not here to just to serve you and be short order cook. We're part of the family, so we want to make sure the kids get that as well. So we made sure kids they thank mom every night after the meal was done. They took turns clearing the table, emptying the dishwasher, or putting the things in the dishwasher, cleaning up. So, and also helped with some of the meals. When they got older, they helped with some meal prep. So that was really great.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, they pick that stuff up. Our kids are watching, whether we think they are or not. They are watching, and they're picking things up. And they might not be able to communicate verbally what they're learning, but they are absolutely learning by our example. Either way, whether we're providing a good example or not, they're learning, they're picking it up. So yeah, great encouragement, great challenge there.
Yeah, I always I make sure I give my wife a little kiss and a hug in front of the kids too. And, of course they thought it's gross, and,
I was going to say that my 12-year-old son, that's his favorite thing on earth, is to see me kiss my wife. No, I'm kidding. That's what we talk about in charting a course, the course that we do for couples. We talk about, there's no better gift that you can give your kids than to love their mom. What a great calling. David, I wonder if you could give us an encouragement, a challenge to men. It could be both, but what would you say to, say we've got some young guys listening to this, and they think, yeah, man, that sounds like me. Career is tough, and having to work late sometimes, maybe having to travel, and man, just trying to think about leading my family on top of it. It's, maybe their wife is more the logistical person, and they just kind of feel like they're an add-on, and they want to take, a role that's more active and a leadership role and be intentional and all that. What would be your challenge, and where could they start, and how could they, sort of push this forward?
That's great. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. For a good question. I think for me, as a young dad, I really always wanted to keep my values, in perspective. What was I really trying to accomplish? Am I trying to become, a CEO? Am I trying to get to the next rung of the ladder? Am I trying to impress the, those at work or even at church to some degree? I was a deacon very young, and, those were challenges too. Gosh, this is, you get some accolades as a young deacon, and they get asked to put on a couple of committees and commissions and things like that, and that's very flattering, but it's also time consuming. So you have to make sure that your time, the time that you have is finite. So you got to make sure that you're investing. I won't say even spending it, but investing it in the right way. So I would just say to young dads, take a look at where you're investing your time. First of all, invest it with the Lord as soon as early as possible in the course of your day. I call it the rudder of the day. If you can get your time with the Lord and kind of set your course for the day is so important. And that really helps to get keep your perspective and values in line. And then just ask yourself the questions when you're asked things for advancement opportunities or for ways to possibly get ahead and move your career. What's the impact going to be? And are you ready to take on that responsibility? And what's the downside? You get advancements or you get a promotion. A lot of times they don't talk about the downside, what it's going to prove to your family, how much more travel it's going to be, how much more temptation you're going to see out there. You're in a hotel room at night. So you just got to be careful of all that stuff. And you got to know that there's downsides to all that. So my challenge would be just get some good, wise counsel around you, get some good, solid, a band of brothers, some guys who are moving in the same direction, have some great godly input, and can just challenge you on that sort of thing, and can kick you in the butt if you need to, and to challenge you and encourage you, pray with you, because some of those life decisions will change the trajectory of your life forever. So make sure you're very, very sure where you're headed with that.
Yeah, that's great. I think you're absolutely right that a lot of times we don't consider the other side of the ledger, so to speak. We might see the money or the title or the promotion or whatever, and not think about what it might do to a family. I remember there's a friend of mine a couple of years ago made a career move, basically taking a step back, and I was just so moved by it that I sent him an email later and I said, man, you will never regret this, because he did it, I think in large part to focus on his family. And I was just like, that's just, you are doing the right thing and you'll never regret this. I'm so proud of you. It's just a cool moment. I love when I see dads do that, because the world does not teach us to do that. It teaches us to make as much money as possible and, let the chips fall where they may. There's nothing wrong with career advancement. It's just that sometimes we don't count the cost of it. So that's I'm really glad you pointed that out.
Yeah. And it's really God honoring too. You want to make those decisions. And sometimes, like you said, that career advancement might be a great move, but it's got to be a God honoring move, and not to be a detriment of your family. And if maybe this season, hey, I'm going to do a little bit of traveling early on, but once you open that barn door with regards to working the 50-60 hour a week, you're working, you're leaving out, and oh gosh, got a meeting Monday morning. Oh gosh, we got to leave on Sunday night now. You do that one time, or you start answering those emails on Saturday and Sunday. You've opened a door that is very difficult to close. So you should be very, very careful on how you handle that stuff.
Yep, that's absolutely right.
The other point I wanted to make too is that as far as your career, about talking with young guys, as I said, God puts us in a rhythm, a 6-day rhythm, and the 7th day is a day of rest. And I think what I'm seeing is this younger generation is they run 7 days a week, and I don't think it's healthy for guys to do that or families to do that, because it doesn't allow God to speak into your life and for you allow you to be rejuvenated and refreshed. Right. For God to speak into your life and for you to seek God out, because if you're just running from one 7-day work week to the next, it's very difficult to hear God's voice and to see where He wants you to be. Yeah,
that's a great point. Great point. Well, I want to touch on quickly something that you mentioned. You mentioned getting a mentor, someone to kind of coach you through some of these decisions. And I wonder if you could just touch on radical mentoring for a second. Just a fantastic ministry. We've done it at Stonebridge. I'd love to sort of give them a plug and put their website up there. Can you talk about just how you've seen the Lord move through radical mentoring?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so radical mentoring really is set up by a man named Reggie Campbell. He died a couple of years ago, but he really had a mindset and a vision to take 5 to 7 guys who are younger and team them up with some older more experienced guys, maybe in 50s, 60s, couple generations ahead, who've had success, failures, experiences, life lessons that they really can pour into guys over a course of a season. And we start typically in January and end up in October. And they meet once a month. We go through a book, and we also have 2 or 3 memory verses that we are expecting these guys to memorize every month. And that's not just for the sake of memorization. That's so they can apply it to their lives.
Sure.
In the course of their conversations and the course of their decision making. So, and then we meet with the guys once a month too. So we have a conversation with them once a month, and not conversation, but we have a 3-hour meeting. And then we also have a time where we can actually meet with them during the course of the month too, to talk about what they've learned and how they can apply it to their lives. So it's really meaningful. Yeah. It's really, it's not for everybody. It's a commitment. It's hard commit once a month. Some guys have a season of life where they're not able to do it. Some guys are really ready to do it. So
yeah,
it's really been terrific. And we're looking for guys to be able to take them to the next level in either church leadership or family leadership, lead life groups, be more invested in their lives at home, things like that. So it depends on where God calls them, but it's really been great.
That's great. Yeah, I remember when you guys talked about that at the men's retreat a couple of years ago, and you had the guys stand up there and just talk about what it had meant to them. So I know it's an impactful ministry. And what I love about it, I mean, I know you guys cover a lot of different topics, but, for our purposes here on the podcast, I love how, radical mentoring can be used to help young men be the fathers and husbands that God has called us to be. And sometimes we need, not just sometimes, I think all young men need some help in this regard. We need someone who's been there, done that, who can say, hey, here are the things that I wrestled with, and these are the lessons that God taught me, and you guys can pass that along to these young men. And I just think it's fantastic. So keep up that great work. I think God will use it and is using it to strengthen families. And that's awesome. David, another thing that I wanted to ask you is I was thinking about wives. So, some of our listeners will be dads and husbands, and some will be wives and moms. And, they might be listening to this thinking like, oh man, I'd love for my husband to listen to this, but maybe he's not going to listen to it. So what would your message be to those wives? Let's say their husband is really wrapped up at work and just not very involved in the home, or, just marginally involved or whatever. What would be your message to them on how they can, sort of call their husbands to, in an empowering way, not, of course, not in a way that makes them feel beat down or anything, but just in an empowering way to step up into the role that God has called us to as men.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things we use in radical mentoring too, is instead of calling men out, we like to call men up to the man that God called him to be.
Excellent.
A lot of people can call you out and, wag the finger. And I think that's really important that we make those two distinctions, because, guys, we all know that the men need respect and the women need love. And I think men need to certainly feel appreciated and to know that they are working hard and that they are providing. But it's also important for the wives to call them up to say, hey, you're a terrific dad too. And I'd love to see you spend more or invest more time in the kids, because they do really need you, and leave something left in the tank. And those are conversations you have either, maybe over a glass of wine, or you have at night when the kids are in bed, or a date night, or a walk, taking the dogs for a walk. But it has to be at a right time too, because guys need to be receptive to hearing what the wives have to say.
Right.
So I guess the worst thing you can do is start when the dads are walking in, the husbands are walking in at the end of the day. Women are good at this. They know how to strategically pit things. But to call the men up to be the godly men call them. Sure. And when they do see the husbands doing something well, encouraging the kids, playing with the kids well. I used to take Charlie to the Home Depot, and we just went to the tool crib and just stuff like that. And Becky would say, it's just so encouraging to see you spend some time with your son, and it's just so meaningful to him, I'm sure. And so like that, when you can appreciate and call him up to be, and encourage him to be the man God called him to be.
Yeah, I really like that. Call them up. That's great. Like you mentioned, we need to be receptive to that. I know sometimes my first response is just defensiveness. It's like, well, I do this and I do that. And our wives are helping us. And sometimes we resist it because we want to just defend our own, our own actions. And I think there's a lot of human / sin nature there, but just to be receptive is so huge. And to admit that, yeah, we may have some blind spots. I mean, Katie, from time to time, she'll say, hey, I think it would be important for you to spend time with this kid or that kid. And man, it's so helpful. And when we do that, when we invest that one-on-one time, or maybe it's one-on-two time. I mean, I had a time with, we've got 3 daughters, and there's another, a dad friend of mine who's got 3 daughters, and we had a daddy-daughter date with them. And it was great. And I just love how wives can call their husbands up to the responsibilities that God has given them. So fantastic.
One more real quick thing too. I think it's important for husbands to appreciate their wives. If you can set up a date night once a month, for example, where you actually are working on getting the babysitter, scheduling the babysitter to come over or picking them up, make a arrangement at a restaurant or a place where you want to go, to take the initiative and do that, I think is so important for the wives to see that. So it makes the whole night completely different. Set that up. So, and that's what God, I think men are called to do that too. We're called to be the leaders. We can go passive pretty easily because the wives, they see that something not getting done. They're going to pick up the ball and run with it. So, and sometimes we as men are pretty good about allowing them to do that and becoming passive. So we got to be careful of that as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, my wife is a natural leader, and if she sees a void, she will step in because somebody needs to handle it. And so that's been a challenge for me. And, she lovingly calls me up all the time, which is such a blessing and such a gift. So thank you for that encouragement for wives. I think that's great. This is going to be our last question, David. I wonder if you could share a scripture or two that has really, meant a lot to you and Becky as you've parented, and a scripture that can encourage some of our families listening.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be a simple one, but I'm a pretty simple guy when it's all said and done. So, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. So that is so important, to trust not only not in yourself, but in the Lord. So that's living under the authority, leaning not on our own understandings. To your point, we have blind spots and we have a worldly understanding a lot of times. So we have to be in God's word and to have good guys around us to help us, point us in the right direction. In all our ways, acknowledge him. Nothing comes from our hands. Nothing is from our doing, really. It's all because of God's grace and mercy with us. So that keeps us humble. And he'll direct our paths. So whether that's career, whether that's family, whether that's marriage, whether that's finances, where you're going to move, where you're going to live, just acknowledge him. He'll direct your paths in that direction. So I've just used that as a marker. And that's great because no matter what stage of your life you're in, where your kids are going, where they're headed, if they're going to summer camp, if they're going to college, if they're going on a vacation with another family or something, you can use that verse with regards to a lot of different things that's so applicable. So I just love that one. It's an easy one to remember, but also a great one to apply.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Thank you. That's one that is rightfully up on our walls.
Yes.
In our homes. All right. Well, David, I think that'll do it. Thank you so much. What a privilege to hear from you and hear how the Lord has worked in you and in your family and marriage over the years. And thank you for what you're doing to encourage young men to step up and be the men that he's called us to be and, lead our families well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Graham. Appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, David. What a blessing to hear from folks like you who don't just talk the talk, but who have really walked the walk. It's such a blessing to those of us who still have kids in the home, and your faithfulness is just really evident and awesome. So thank you so much. Well, check us out on strategicfamilies.com. We'd love to see you there and provide some resources to you, and we'd love to hear from you as you strive to create a strategic family by God's grace for his kingdom and his glory. All right, let's do it. We'll see you next time.